Thank you again, Susan. So in the headline for this webinar today, Organizational Culture and Project Delivery, the question is your job a right fit? And the write-up goes on to say your ability to succeed is only partly because of skill set and talent. So there are other factors that weigh into your ability to lead and deliver projects successfully or to be a business leader in your organization. And what we're going to talk about today is what we need to understand to be able to influence in our current organization for both individual and organizational success. And the foundational place where I'd like to start is to give 3 different scenarios. The one scenario is you matter. We're working in a collaborative environment. It's an agile environment where there's the ability to adapt and pivot quickly, where there's an open, continuous feedback loop, where teamwork is pretty well functioning and high performing. The team members are they are empowered and they're encouraged to be innovative and creative. There's a continuous process improvement mindset. The next slide, scenario 2, it's more of an authoritarian, top-down leadership style. Do what I say, but there's no strategy. It's a culture built on political alliances, hierarchy matters, and because of the behavior, I'll say, of the leadership team, people are afraid to speak, and therefore teams operate in silos. It's not an open, cross-functional, collaborative team environment. Scenario 3 on the next slide. We actually go into organizational backstabbing. There's perceived employee freedom, but in actuality, there's micromanagement, which is very different. Management is very different than leadership. So management would be considered more of a tactical trait. It's fact-based. It's black and white. We have a checkbox mentality, which is very different than example number 1, where we have true leadership that is empowering, delegating based on defined strategy. In scenario 3, the teams are also working in silos. And what's flashing in red letters here to me is that there is a lack of trust. Next slide, please. So let's think about what characteristics do you want in a company that you work for? Think about the 3 scenarios that I just mentioned. Do any of them resonate with you? Do any of them feel better for you or feel as if they would be more productive to actually accomplish and produce work, product, and results? I used to tell my kids as they were entering the workforce, every company in corporate America, probably around the world globally, is dysfunctional. They're all like families. They're all dysfunctional. It's just the degree to which they exhibit dysfunction, which means that you have to choose your battles. There's no ideal environment, and not everything is going to be perfect. But based on our skill sets, based on our communication styles, our motivators, and our behaviors, and based on what we desire to accomplish at each stage of our career journey, we can try as best possible to find a good fit. So the characteristics that you want in the company that you work for, do they exist in your current organization? And if not, why not? And is that something that could possibly be enhanced and changed? Or is the culture so embedded with leaders that have long tenure that there's no hope of changing in your lifetime? And something that very rarely, I believe, people think about when they are actually looking for a job, have you considered the company culture? Are you asking those questions, or are you just looking for a specific job, a functional role within the organization that aligns to your skill set and where you think you can be successful? Remember, success does not just mean what you bring to the table and the value that you can add, but it can be influenced by factors beyond your control within the cultural context of the team you're working in, the division you're working in, or the enterprise at large. And then think about, within those contexts, thinking systemically, what is actually your ability to influence within each of those systems or subsystems? So we've established that no organization is a perfect ecosystem. All are complex, they're dynamic, and they're ever-changing. So once you think you figured it out, it's going to change. It's just the way it is. It's like as your kids are growing up and you try to figure out each stage that they go through. So what contributes to high-functioning environments and what sets projects up for successful delivery? Next slide, please. And audience, please forgive me. I'm fighting laryngitis, but I'm slowly getting over this cold that I've had. So what company do you want to work for? Two of the scenarios that I mentioned are Fortune 50 companies. One is highly successful with self-functioning teams, always answers to the Wall Street analysts, and stock does great. One is a sub-entity within a Fortune 50 company that, frankly, is failing. And I can tell you that over the last few years, not only is this subsidiary failing, but the entire executive team in one of the divisions has been replaced. That's how bad it is. Another company is owned by venture capitalists, and their time frame to go for an IPO, an initial public offering, has been extended year over year over year. That's not a good thing when you want someone to purchase you. Next slide, please. So anyone who has dialed into my webinars in the past, I'm a pretty get back to basics and keep it simple person. So we're going to go all the way back to kindergarten, where I think somebody wrote a book about everything that you ever needed to know you learned in kindergarten. And culture is actually something that you do. It is a set of living relationships working toward a shared goal. Workplace culture, all of us contribute to, and we have to be willing to take risks. We spend so many hours at work. Do we want to have fun with the people that we work with, or do we want it to be nose to the grindstone, silo-oriented, no place or no person to reach out to for help, or do we want it to be a collaborative brainstorming environment where we bring our best selves to the table and we encourage others to get to a better place collectively than we could have ever gotten individually? We don't want to make assumptions, because assumptions are rooted in our biases, influenced by the environment that we grew up in, the place that we are, the environment or the relationships that we're in present day, etc. And we want to encourage folks that it's okay to fail. This is part of the Agile methodology. Fail early, fail fast, but get up and encourage one another, encourage yourself, be nurturing, self-nurturing to try again. So, I always say to my team members, it's okay to deliver bad news. Just deliver it early and come with a contingency plan so that we have something to talk about. We want to create a nurturing, creative, safe environment, which is what our kindergarten teachers did. It was about being fun coming to school for, if you're in Pennsylvania, it was half-day kindergarten. It was about the socialization and getting used to playing with other children, not just backyard fun or not just organized sports or, your siblings within the family, but it was about getting out of that safe environment at home, going to school on the bus if that was your mode of transportation, and building new relationships that you were going to leverage on the playground, maybe during coloring time, block building time, or whatever. It was about feeling safe in another place other than with your parents in the home environment. Hopefully, it also was a space where you could be vulnerable so that you could bring your best self and learn that you could be accepted no matter what. You're learning to build relationships, and even in kindergarten, there's a shared purpose, and that shared purpose is to learn. Next slide, please. So let's look at these word puzzles. I'm just going to pause here and have you take a look at each of the three. Organizationally, there's no right answer. So you'll see that in the top word puzzle, we have teamwork and flexibility and cultural readiness and organizational culture, values. It might be a digital workplace. There's loyalty. There's best practices. There's outward-looking teamwork. It's future-focused. There's assertiveness, not aggressiveness. Blockers are recognized, and people work collaboratively to try to remove those impediments in order to move forward and create a work product. In the word puzzle to the right, we're choosing positivity. There's transparency. We focus on self-improvement, which helps the team as well. We discourage egos. We actively listen, communicate with clarity and overly communicate, show gratitude. Thank you are the two biggest words that are rarely spoken in corporate America, and they are so important. And we strive to do the right thing. The third word puzzle talks about ethics, reputation, trust, being of high moral and ethical character, understanding, being responsible, being principled, having standards, and having standards that are institutionalized throughout the organization. So you can see that for whatever organization you're in, you can choose adjectives that would describe the culture, and based on that word puzzle that's put together, it would be very indicative of the environment that you're working within, and it would also, to someone who is skilled at reading that, be an indication of, is this a high-performing culture? Is this one with issues and brokenness, or somewhere in between? So let's look at the next slide. Being relaxed in the workplace, but having a dynamic workplace that's focused, where folks are motivated. It's a driven environment that brings challenges. People are hardworking, and yet there is flexibility. There's brainstorming. All of these are positive attributes that would yield toward success. Next slide, please. So from an operating model perspective, what we want to do first and foremost is build safety, because that helps build a strong culture. So signals of connection generate bonds of belonging and identity. You want to not only build trust, but let your team members know that you care. If they're having a bad day, if something's not working out at work, help pick up the slack for them. And that will reap rewards for you on days that you're not having a good day, or that problem solving, that puzzle piece is not coming to you one day, and somebody else will step forward and say, aha, I think I have that light bulb moment, that puzzle piece that you've been missing. So relationship importance is signaled by individual connection and then intentional listening. And combining those two attributes, the connection and the active listening, we're continuing to build relationship, we're continuing to build trust, and we're continuing to feel cared about within the context of the workplace. It promotes a team orientation where every single team member has a voice, and yet there's diversity because they're bringing different perspectives and different skill sets to the problem at hand that needs to be solved for, whether it's project work or whatever. And then going back to what I had mentioned earlier, it's so important to communicate, and clarify that communication, Because how many times have you been in a family setting and said something maybe to one of your kids, and what you said, that message that you think you said, is not the message that they heard for whatever reason. It doesn't matter. It's the responsibility of both the messenger and the receiver to make sure that that communication is understood and agreed to by both parties. So how do you indicate that you're active listening? You might tilt your head forward slightly. You might lean toward the speaker, affirm the speaker by saying yes or I've got that, Let them know that you are engaged in the conversation or hearing the message that they are trying to deliver in maybe even a larger group context. Embrace the messenger by physically, by your body language, denoting that you are engaged in the conversation. And then leader fallibility is present when someone radiates humility. They tend to be a servant leader because they want to be approachable. They won't do anything, they won't ask you to do anything that they wouldn't also step to the plate and do themselves. They want to create safety, and leaders need to actively invite input by being, I mentioned earlier, by being approachable. So this is a way that we're creating an operating model where safety is being built within the cultural context of an organization. Next slide, please. The next component of this operating model would be to share vulnerability. And sometimes that can be very risky, and it can be a scary thing, especially in the workplace, because the workplace can also be a very competitive place to be. And we all are working because we want to earn a paycheck. We're not necessarily there for the fun, although we want to have a pleasurable experience and enjoy the time that we're at work during working hours. But being vulnerable can be contagious. And actually, that act of being vulnerable actually is a predecessor step to earning someone's trust. Because when you're coming forth and you're presenting your authentic self, someone knows, they can perceive what your strengths are, maybe what your weaknesses are, and depending on their character and how they operate, they can seize a moment and exploit opportunity either in a good way or present themselves as a threat. Hopefully within the operating model that we're trying to build, by creating safety and by sharing vulnerability, it is contagious to the point where folks will not take advantage of it, but instead they will want to also bring their best foot forward, their best sense of self, and be authentic in order to establish meaningful relationships. So how habits of mutual risk drive trust and cooperation. It encourages authenticity. We see someone being humble, and we see the truth and have a tendency to take ownership. It promotes interconnectedness because folks then establish the relationships, not only the one-to-one dynamic, but cross-functionally across a team and across teams. We start developing a genuine attachment to one another, and then ideas come within and develop uniquely or in an organic manner. which is really what we want. That's the best way to make things happen. So we want to avoid being judgmental. And in capital letters, I have talked earlier about active listening. We want to listen in capital letters. We want this to happen organically with gentle guidance, prompt open-ended questions, and I'll say there was power in subtlety. There's nothing that shuts someone down more quickly than a critical spirit or someone opens their mouth with an idea at a meeting and immediately they're assigned the task of getting something done. Let's brainstorm and look at it, develop a plan in order to respond to the root cause of something rather than be respond to a problem that needs or a project that needs to be solved for, rather than be reactionary where folks tend to be shut down and be afraid to speak up. Next slide, please. We want to be courageous in seeing the truth and speaking the truth to one another. The truth doesn't always need to be positive, and it doesn't always need to be sugar-coated. If you have a team member that is overstepping one of your boundaries, say they are critical, constantly critical of other team members and not presenting positivity or their best sense, that can be their best self. That can be a cancer within an organization, and the leader of that team should be taking them offline and addressing that. Think with one brain. So think about Tuckman's performing phase. We want to be a high-functioning team. We want to be performing. We want to be thinking each other's thoughts and acting accordingly. If something is due today and the leader of the team is in a status meeting and they say, oh, and this step needs to be performed, I've actually been in team meetings where somebody said, hey, Deb, I've already thought about that. It's done. And we review it and check it off the list. It's a wonderful thing. It's beautiful. And then, praise is important. Not to be overly done, but if somebody has really gone above and beyond and is making that extra effort or has come up with a creative idea that the team has been stuck on moving forward with, give a praise. Give a spot award, give, 4 hours of comp time, but let that person know that they're appreciated, and a little bit will go a long way. So these groups are cohesive not because it's natural, but because they've built piece by piece, and this is critical, the shared mental muscles to connect and to cooperate. And at this point, I'll just pause and say, sometimes teams that appear to be the most broken ended up when they get splintered apart and there's an attempt made to bring them back together and build them to greater maturity. Because of that brokenness and because they've had to put everything on the table in order to move forward, they've worked through adversity and they become stronger. They become like they have that gorilla glue that holds them together, and they're harder to break than teams that haven't moved past adversity. And so diversity is a good thing within a team, and adversity is not a bad thing to experience. Next slide, please. So the operating model, this becomes a culture where you have like a hand in a glove, a workplace, and a culture that are like cogs in a wheel that have learned to work together. Next slide, please. So we're establishing purpose as part of continuing to build this operating model. What do we need for that? What's the mission statement? If we understand as a team what our goal and objective are, that really helps understand and keep us focused as we move through execution, as we plan and we move through execution. So we want to define the goal and objective. We want to communicate frequently. All resources need to know what the mission statement is because it drives us to a common purpose and it helps us present with shared goals and values. It helps create a high-purpose environment, which leads to well-functioning, high-performing teams. It causes establishing purpose helps to cause linkage between where we are and an undefined vision, which you will help create. So it establishes a need within us to be a contributing member to something that is being uniquely created and gives us individually purpose as well as the team's purpose, which will ultimately help the organization. We want to practice discipline. That connection, finding a point of connection, taking the time to connect human to human in this age of bots and technology, to find that human point of connection and build relationship is so vital. Experiencing disruption or failing together, as I mentioned, it creates a bond and it hones the individual and the team focus. Continuing on the next slide, we need to actually give ourselves permission to break old boundaries to discover new heights. Fall fast and fail early. Debrief with retrospective. Be honest. Don't be cruel, but be honest and speak the truth. The awkward, painful interactions end up actually precipitating high cohesion in teams. And then always think continuous process improvement. We can always do things better. So that is why we work and where our energy should be spent. Next slide, please. We talk about safety, vulnerability, and purpose, and this is the future of work. So we are 3 times more, we have the likelihood of employees staying in a purpose-driven organization. There's 10 times purpose-led companies outperforming the S&P 500 by 10 times between the time frame of 1996 and 2014. Under vulnerability, we have 75% of the companies with a clear sense of purpose are the new leaders in customer retention with a 75% retention rate. 89% of clients believe a purpose-driven company will deliver the highest quality products and services. And then in the last column, 120% meaningful brands connected to human well-being outperform the stock market by 120% in 2013. So whoever's told you that technology is the best thing since sliced bread, I think it's about not only the technology, but it's the blend of bringing that human element into it and maximizing the human need for safety, for relationship, for being a part of something bigger than yourself. Next slide, please. So let's talk about isms. Let's assume good intent. At Zappos, they talk about creating fun and a little weirdness. IDEO, talk less, do more. A New York City restaurant owner talked about creating raves for guests. And in the military, there's a leave no man behind policy. So you know you're a part of something where you're going to be protected and you're safe to the best of your fellow servicemen's ability. Isms are like mission statements in that they help focus the workforce toward a common purpose. They're unifying statements and they're catchphrases that the workforce can relate to. I'll pause here and ask if you can think of anything in your workforce. Maybe your CEO at their town hall meetings always has a few statements that they go back to. The one CEO that I worked for always said, assume good intent. He also always said, deliver bad news early. And it's funny because 20 years later, many of us who were citizens of that company at that time have taken those phrases into other places and applied them effectively. They were stated intentionally. They resonated with us. We saw how they applied in a positive way to our work efforts, and we've carried them forward as part of our, career tool chest. Next slide, please. So igniting the workforce energy comes from experimentation and failures, then developing new, fresh ideas. We can develop new ways of interacting, and it changes behavior. The same group of people can systematically transform an organization. That's no small feat, but it's possible, because the team's greatest challenge is building and sustaining the team itself. And when they focus on their relationships and getting them right, everything else will follow. Creativity isn't just about creativity. It's about building ownership, providing support, and aligning group energy toward the challenging journey of creating something new. We want to tailor leadership and be adaptable. Assess, and reassess. It's like the communication. Overly communicate and clarify. Do not ask anyone to do something that as a leader you would not do yourself. Ties back to servant leadership. And above all, be transparent. The platoon captain didn't think of this, did he? His plan is awful. My plan would have been much better. Next slide, please. So from a thought leadership perspective, we're blending the science of technology or the science of the triple constraints and project work with the art of delivering business results, leveraging technology to add to business value. It's not only about bigger, better, faster. It's not only about data analytics. It's not only about digitalization and automation. It's about culture where you're connecting people to people. Next slide, please. Those topics have come more and more into the forefront with the leading journals and what's being published in this space. So the Harvard Business Review in 2020, their March-April edition, creating a culture of experimentation, good tools aren't enough. You need a total change in attitude. Your company is too risk-averse. Become a better corporate citizen. In July to August 2018, their issue, that issue was When Work Has Meaning, How to Turn Purpose into Performance. Are You Too Collaborative was another article. Do your employees feel respected? Created a purpose-driven organization. Managers don't have all of the answers. So in that one periodical, they had 5 issues that align to soft skills and the art of business or the art of management, project management. In the January to February 2018 edition, the culture factor. Employee attitudes can make or break your business. Here's how to get everyone moving in the right direction. In the March to April 2017 edition, there were 3 articles. The New Science of Teamwork. There's a new science of teamwork. We need people to lean into the future. People to lean into the future, not bots. How work styles inform leadership. So as an example from my business, the DISC assessment, what are people's communication styles? What are their motivators? What are their behaviors? How does that impact their work style? And if a leader is aware of their own work style, communication styles, and motivators, they're self-aware, they can learn how to become other-aware and be better influencers in meetings. Next slide, please. So scenario number 3, the organizational backstabbing, perceived employee freedom, but there wasn't any freedom, micromanagement, silos, lack of trust. This organization has gone over year job eliminations. It has not yet been purchased by a venture capitalist company, and frankly, the current leadership is being moved laterally, and the senior leadership team is trying to figure out how to move forward. This Fortune 10 sub-entity, the communication continues to be disconnected both vertically and horizontally. There's a lack of leadership. The executive team talks the talk, but they don't walk the walk. What they say versus what they do can be very different, and in not being authentic or transparent, there's no trust within the organization, and people stay to themselves and just work in a silo mentality. It's generated a fear-based environment, but because it's a sub-entity of a Fortune 10 company, the benefits are good, the 401k match is good, and so people persevere, but they hate their jobs. They don't want to go to work. As a result, there are low-performing teams, and they're not results-oriented. Collaboration is poor. There's low morale. People are interviewing for jobs, but they keep going back to the baseline of, I work for a Fortune 10 company. I'm hoping it will get better, but it circles and it cycles and it's not getting better. There really needs to be change at the top level, which is what the corporate office is starting to recognize. Maintaining high-quality resources is a challenge because what you end up doing is you end up discouraging and losing your high performers who recognize that something's not going to change and they get a better offer, and so they move on. Projects are not well-defined, so many fail. This sub-entity is losing a lot of money. And so they're also at risk for being absorbed into another sub-entity, and ultimately job loss, whether forced upon them or because their leaders are being forced to retire and there's a change in command. Next slide, please. Do what I say. There are political alliances. There are no real strategies. Hierarchy matters. Next slide. This company, too, the communication is very disconnected, vertically and horizontally. There's a lack of leadership. There's conflict between the old world and a new world executive team. Political battles permeate all organizational levels, so when the leadership team is battling, that doesn't bode well for folks who are actually trying to get the job done because there could be many conflicting agendas. So from a communication standpoint, from a clarity standpoint, from a building strong teams and being able to evolve team perspective, when you're working in a chaotic environment that is always shifting mindset and you're not getting clear direction, you tend to have low-performing teams, people that are backbiting each other, throwing people under the bus, not results-oriented because they're throwing their hands up and saying, what does it matter? So again, collaboration is poor, low morale. Projects meander and do not deliver on time or budget, which frankly costs the bottom line ROI of the company, impacts any bonuses, and you kind of feel like you're stuck as an employee. Let's move to the next slide. You, capital letters, matter. We're now working in a collaborative environment where we're empowered, high-performing team, thinking for each other, caring and trusting one another, respecting one another with that continuous process improvement mindset. We're going to move to the next slide. So projects deliver successfully. This is a capital letter winning organization that has sustainability over time. This is a Fortune 50 company, branded name that you would recognize. They've gone through a couple acquisitions or they've acquired and now they've merged with another large entity that's a branded company. High level of communication, strong leadership team that's providing strategic vision and guidance. They have high-performing teams because, honestly, they've become so results-oriented that they recognize that we swim together or we sink together, and sinking is not an option because if we sink, we're out the door. Now, that sounds like a lot of pressure, but when you're working together as a team and you're high-performing, you're getting that both intrinsic and external satisfaction, intrinsic and extrinsic satisfaction of a job well done. And you don't want to sink. You want to work together and continue to innovate. You're highly collaborative, high morale, low attrition. The rewards is that successful projects that add business value with full benefit realization. And at the end of the day, you're not only commanding a good salary, but you're getting a great merit bonus at review time. So we'll move to the next slide. I found this slide during the pandemic, and I've used it in several presentations because I just love it. You've got this larger dog that is cuddling with this small kitten, and to me, it just exudes care from the animal kingdom. So organization culture matters, and it is definitively a predecessor to successful project delivery and adding business value. And it actually starts with you. It's what are you bringing to the table? How are you presenting? Are you allowing yourself to be vulnerable? Are you active listening? Are you work-focused and like challenges, but you're also amenable to listening to other people's ideas, and you're connecting with your teammates in order to truly build authentic relationships, which will ultimately result in creativity and innovation that will satisfy a lot of different wants and needs depending on the diversity of the team. So I just wanted to share that it's been a while now, 2011, but I still have a book on Amazon called The Power of Interpersonal Skills in Project Management. Look at various social characteristics to in that art versus science space in developing soft skills. So communication, leadership, team building, negotiation, facilitation, stakeholder management.
Deb, we thank you so much for taking the time to present with us today.
My pleasure. Thank you for the opportunity.